George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
We're back, baby, we are back. And I don't just mean the 10 men in red, heroes all of Manchester United. I mean Gayatri and me, just off the aeroplane and straight to the studio in borrowed clothes. We haven't slept in a bed for 48 hours, but boy, are we raring to go. It's difficult to know which to start with first. Labour, the governing party in Britain, is revealed to be rotten to the core, like a year-old apple, and the stench is becoming overpowering for the British people. I said to you at the new year that Keir Starmer would no longer be the Prime Minister next new year. At the moment, I'm wondering if he'll still be there by Easter. And the United States of America, and in particular its ruling party, the so-called laughingly described Democratic Party, having burned Gaza to the ground, have caused the burning to the ground of just about the most iconic place in the United States itself. Of course, I mean Hollywood. There's that and much, much more coming up here on the mother of all talk shows. So my advice to you is to fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night. And if you're watching, Your Majesty, and you should be, I'm going to be talking about you too. Stay tuned. It's the mother of...
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
International viewers, bear with me, because although you will not recognize some of the names I'm about to talk about, you will recognize the theme. You will recognize the moral degeneracy that was erupting in Britain yesterday with the televised arrest of an alleged sex offender who turned up at a venue to have sex in a threesome with what he thought was a 15-year-old schoolboy. He was caught by a vigilante group. You may not like vigilantes. I think they have done the country and the society a favour by demonstrating just how revoltingly degenerate, even on a personal level, the Labour Party has become. Now, the rabbit trapped in the headlights, staring at the camera, bumbling his words, was once a very powerful man indeed in British government. I first met him when I was clashing with him on an almost daily basis when he was one of Tony Blair's war ministers during the invasion and occupation of Iraq, which killed 1 million people and destroyed the lives of millions of others. But when he left the war ministry, he didn't go quiet. He didn't stop destroying other people's lives. And it is now alleged that he was ready to destroy a child's life, even though that child turned out to be a hairy-arsed vigilante who had entrapped him. He knew, all right, that the boy was a schoolboy because the boy told him multiple times that he was a schoolboy. But that didn't stop Ivorcaplin, former defense minister, with his finger on the trigger, wanted to get his finger on a schoolboy and share him at that with his partner, who he names as Stephen. Maybe there will be more to come on that. Now, that's not all you need to know about Ivorcaplin. You need to know that He's not a Pakistani. He's not even a Muslim. As a matter of fact, he's Jewish, and he is a rabid supporter of Benjamin Netanyahu. And his Israel, by the way, is turning out to be quite a playground for that type of person that ivorcaplin seems to be. The head of the so-called Jewish, so-called labor movement, ivorcaplin was the head of an organization which, to join, you neither had to be Jewish nor did you have to be labor. And why is this important? Because the man trapped by the vigilantes today played a leading role in the destruction of Jeremy Corbyn and his project as the former leader of the Labour Party. Mr. Corbyn's far too nice to say the things that I am now saying and am about to say. He hunted Corbyn in a witch hunt from a moral high ground when his feet were in a cesspit of filth, obscenity, degeneracy. That probably sounds familiar to you in your country too, because it is now an axiom, an axiom, that the more rabidly pro-Israel Zionist you are, the more likely you are to be a corrupt and repulsive individual. You have to be repulsive to be completely unmoved at the mass murder of children on a daily basis. For sure, almost 100 children have been murdered this year, and it's only the 12th of January. But the moral, repugnant, revolting degeneracy displayed in the personal lives and the business lives of the biggest supporters of Israel is now legion. I don't have time to adumbrate the wickedness of these people. And as a believer in right and wrong myself, I have to believe that it is not a coincidence that the biggest supporters of Zionism in the Western world are almost always, with one or two exceptions, are almost always the most repugnant individuals. And that certainly covers ivorcaplin. He was one of the main authors of the so-called anti-Semitism, fake, hoax anti-Semitism allegations that hunted Jeremy Corbyn to his political grave. And that's important, whether you like Jeremy Corbyn or not, because it was the destruction of the Corbyn Labour Party that led to Boris Johnson, with global implications. Million people, more than 1 million people have died in Ukraine. Boris Johnson played a central role in that. He would never have been the Prime Minister if people like ivorcaplin, former MP, former Defence Minister in Tony Blair's so-called Labour government, if Corbyn had survived the assault. And he made many mistakes in the ways that he tried to deal with it, mainly by throwing his friends under the bus, feeding them to the crocodiles in the hope that the crocodiles would eat him last. But that's a story for another day. Kaplan and co. in the Zionist industry that is central to the political life in this country now, and the media life in this country now. Want to know how I know that? This Kaplan story I'm telling you now has hardly had a breath of publicity after weeks in which Pakistanis and Muslims whose names nobody knew were plastered on the front of every newspaper. But a man at the centre of Tony Blair's Labour government is caught out in the way he was caught out. It can't even get on the news. That's how I know that this cult of Israel has become the dominant cult in political life in Western countries. And that is an issue, a story, a narrative that is as true in the United States, where many of you are watching now, as it is true in Britain, as it is true in Germany, as it is true in France and other European countries. Nobody else will tell you, even if they ever report this case, that Kaplan was Jewish, that Kaplan was a leading Zionist figure. None of them will tell you that. Though the mere hint of a dusky hue in many aspects of the criminal law in Britain gets you labelled, stamped on your forehead. You're a Muslim, you're a Pakistani, you're predisposed to sin, when of course the entire opposite is true. If you do the things that these groomers and pedophiles are doing in a Muslim society, you'll be shot in the head if you are lucky. Your head will be severed from your shoulders if you are unlucky. So I've been down the rabbit hole over the last hours. And what do I discover? That this Ivor Kaplan is in pictures with the who's who of the British establishment, who continue, in many cases, still to follow him on Twitter. King Charles is pictured with him. Maybe that's not quite the surprise that it would once have been about a British monarch. As I joked today, at this critical juncture, King Charles might want to consult Sir Keir Starmer, his Prime Minister, the man who failed to prosecute Sir Jimmy Savile. Or he could consult the Archbishop of Canterbury. Oh wait, the Archbishop of Canterbury has had to resign in a child sex scandal. Or he could consult the Duke of York, his own brother. Oh wait, the Duke of York cannot show his face in public because of his involvement in the Jeffrey Epstein affair. Or he could consult his own ambassador, already packing his Gucci loafers for Washington, Baron Mandelson, Keir Starmer's newly appointed British ambassador in Washington. And believe me, I could go on. 52 Labour councillors that we know of, 52 of them in the last couple of years, few years, have been convicted of the most wicked, foul, depraved, degenerate behaviour, often involving children when not involving animals. And I'm not making that up. But this goes to, I think, a deeper issue, and one which is common across the Western world. Our entire societies are now in a helter-skelter downwards towards the pits of degeneracy. And how did that happen? Why was it allowed to happen? Why did nobody stop it happening? If you look at the standards of monarchs, of presidents, of prime ministers and kings and parliamentarians and senators and Congress members, if you look at the mayors, if you look even at the judges in many Western countries, their reputations are scarred out of all recognition by corruption and wickedness. How did that happen? Well, it started when we decided that anything goes. That there's no God, there's no religion, there's no right and wrong, there's no morality and immorality. You can do whatever you like, to whomsoever you like, wherever you like. You can go on a naked bike ride through the centre of London and wave your putrescent, semi-erect penis at the passers-by. You can go on a parade on the back of a truck, on a float. You can dress in women's underwear and cavort as lewdly as you like in public, in front of children and old ladies, frightening the horses. When we decided not only that you could do these things, but that the public would be shanghaied into paying for these things. The taxpayer would be charged with the cost of these kind of things, these transvestites going into children's libraries and putting on burlesque performances and so on. It started when we decided that a woman could have a penis, that a man could have a cervix, that a man could go into a girl's toilet or changing room, that a man could say he was a woman and that the rest of us had to treat him as if that were true. This spiral downwards is what I am talking about. Now, please believe me, I am not remotely a prude. I believe that anyone can do anything that they want in their private lives, but not in public. And don't ask me to celebrate it. Whatever it is that turns you on, good luck to you. I mean that. Good luck to you. As long as it's legal and as long as you don't try, if you'll forgive the phrase, to ram it down my throat. And in particular, expose children to premature sexualization and exploitation, like it is alleged that Ivorcaplin was captured doing just yesterday. Now, I believe in God. You already know that. Most of you maybe don't. But don't you see something divine in the turning of Hollywood into Gaza? Can't you, with all sympathy to those people who've lost their lives and their property, can't you see the irony in that? That Biden and the Democrats turned Gaza into a Holocaust, and then a Holocaust struck the very heart of American soft power, burning out some of the biggest supporters of the Hiroshimization of the poor Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip, for whom no one is shedding a tear amongst the powerful and the wealthy and the engaged in Western countries. Nobody knows how many kids were killed today in Gaza amongst that milieu, and nobody even cares. They don't know because they don't care. because other people's lives, other people's homes, other people's families are irrelevant to you. Well, perhaps, God decided to show the people of the United States exactly what's been happening in the burning tents in Gaza. The important difference is that, so far as I know, all the hospitals in the Los Angeles area are intact and in working order. No one will murder the ambulance man or the fireman as he speeds towards your address to try and rescue you. You will receive succor and comfort not from the insurance companies that you were paying all these years. They have helpfully opted out. But you will receive the sympathy of the mass media, of the very television stations that have completely ignored similar fires, similar infernos, actually paid for by the United States taxpayer themselves. Netanyahu's a criminal, but Joe Biden is a bigger criminal, because Netanyahu's crimes could not have been committed but for the never-ending largesse of the Democratic Party of the United States of America. And guess what? They don't just run for another couple of days at least the White House and the Hill. They run California too. A California which ran out of water in their fire hydrants, whose firefighters, men and women, gallant men and women, could not fight the fires because there was no water. Why is there no water? Well, it turns out that another morally repugnant supporter of Israel and Netanyahu, a funder of illegal settlements in Palestine, a man and wife team, the Resnicks, they own all the water in the state of California, and they have refused to invest in making sure that the abundant Pacific Ocean could be desalinated and filled into the reservoirs. They have refused to do anything about the water scarcity in the state of California. Why? Because it's more profitable for them for there to be a shortage of water in California, because a lack of supply means a big rise in demand, and a big rise in demand of something in short supply, well, listen to the shekels rustling, if you will. I'll be talking to two fine Americans in just a minute. You do, I promise you, you do want to stick around to hear them. Stay tuned.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the
the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Just something I forgot to mention. Forgive me. Continuation of the monologue for 60 more seconds. All these people, Gordon Brown, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, the Crown Prosecution Service, and all these grandees that still follow the aforementioned ivorcaplin, can they, have looked at his Twitter timeline? Not only is it a blizzard of obscenity with the most extraordinary things I have ever seen, it turns out he's got a thing for dwarves, a sexual thing for dwarves. He seeks out dwarves to have sex with. What does Gordon Brown think when a man he's following on Twitter is openly appealing to be a bottom, whatever that is, to a dwarf? As long as the dwarf's not dwarfish in every sense. I'm sorry to make that introduction to the very fine and morally as pure as the driven snow, Garland Nixon, who is our most welcome first guest of the evening. Garland, I'm sorry to expose you to all this obscenity, but it is the zeitgeist in Britain today, I must say. And I know by American standards these things are quite horrifying. But let me start by asking you if anyone else in the United States has made the connection, let me put it that way, between sending billions and billions of dollars to scores of billions of dollars to Ukraine and to Israel when you can't even put out fires in the heart of America's iconic Hollywood. Does anybody make that connection?
Well, I would argue that Martin Luther King made that connection back in the 1960s when he said the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. Now, I'm not saying that in that I want bad things to happen to California or to the people of California. Certainly I don't. However, in this particular instance, you would have to listen to that quote and look at what's going on there and hope that maybe the people, some of the people in that region could wake up to reality and understand that we literally saw people burned to death in tents, and that exact same punishment, if that's the right word, is being visited upon the people who have used their power in the media to cover up and excuse those kinds of activities.
It is, I mean, it's undeniable fact that the money that was sent to little Zelensky and Netanyahu, if it had been spent on America's own infrastructure, well, the reservoirs wouldn't be empty. The ocean would have been desalinated. The fire hydrants would have worked. The fire department would not have suffered a massive cut in its numbers and in its equipment. I mean, morally, it is an extraordinary damnation of the political class in the state of California, who are, of course, all Democrats.
Well, as a perfect example of what you're saying, the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, she's a former member of Congress. She's also the former vice chair for the National Endowment of Democracy. Up until last year, even when she was the mayor, she was still on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, the CIA's regime change operation that pretends not to be a CIA regime change operation. When this disaster went down, she was in fact in Ghana on some foreign policy mission. What that has to do with her duties as the mayor of Los Angeles, I don't know. She cut $17 million recently from the budget of the fire department in Los Angeles. They fired a number of firemen who refused to take the, shall we say, safe and effective option that was offered to them by the city of Los Angeles. So, I mean, when you look at this disaster, there is certainly a line of activity that points to this coming. And here's the weird thing. In recent months and years, there's been, particularly in recent months and even weeks, there have been a great number of people who have had their fire insurance canceled. And then a bunch of fires started when we're not even in fire season, kind of serendipitously, simultaneously, after all of these people got their fire insurance canceled, fires started all over the place. It's really strange what's going on in California.
It is very strange. And of course, the Liberals claim it's about climate change. Others see arsonists running wild on the streets. I've seen the videos myself. What is the real story about these fires, do you think?
The truth is, right now, we don't know the real stories about how they're started. But I think there are so many other things to discuss here because we may never know how they started. Certainly, it's kind of strange that they all started just before we had all of these like 80-mile-an-hour gust of winds. It was, kind of the perfect storm, actually, technically. Absolutely the perfect storm here for this kind of disaster. But the issue goes back to government response, that the system is, I would like to say it's broken, but it's not broken. It works exactly as it should. We can go to East Palestine in Ohio, Pennsylvania, with the train turning over. The government at the time, Joe Biden, was too focused on getting $60 billion for Kiev to deal with that. We can look at what happened recently in the North Carolina, Tennessee region with the catastrophic floods, and they offered people $700. Yeah. At the same time, they were sending another $10 billion overseas. And of course, Joe Biden responded very effectively to this particular paying this particular incident by giving another $500 million to Ukraine. So perhaps if the people in Los Angeles would move to Kiev, they could get a few dollars to help them out in this particular incident.
For a few dollars more. It's Lee Van Cleef's 100th birthday, by the way. The resnicks, tell me about them. I mean, 50 years ago, I remember Faye Dunaway and Jack Nicholson in a movie called Chinatown, which was precisely about ruthless capitalists owning water resources and starving the people of them in order to make a private profit. That was seems to me, as I recall it, it's many years since I saw it, that was the whole thesis of the film. And now, life imitates art. This couple, the Resnicks, bought up all the water resources in the state of California. How is that even possible?
The fact that, here's the sad thing. We'll never be able to answer that question. That's the sad thing, because there was a secret meeting some years ago in which the water resources were transferred to the Resnicks. This was water, again, neoliberal outsourcing. The people of California own their water resources. I mean, they are water, should anybody even own them in the first place. But whatever the case, certainly there has to be infrastructure to move the water in a desert environment such as California. But the Resnicks were able to have some kind of a secret meeting, and I would imagine they were one of the top donors for Dianne Feinstein and very, very close friends with the Feinstein family. So I would imagine that may have had something to do with it. But there's the infamous secret meeting, and afterwards they got control of a significant portion of the water resources. Now they have farms, I understand, like 3 times the size of San Francisco, pistachio, all kinds of things like that. They've been accused in the past of subverting the water resources from some of the regions where the people needed it to some of their farms. So you see the neoliberal game, a secret corrupt meeting with very, very powerful people that we'll never know about. And in the end, the people get burned to death. And there's no water in the hydrants of all things. But we were protected. We were protected because they fired a lot of firemen because they refused to take the safe and effective option. So I guess somehow that must have saved some lives, according to the people in charge.
Wow. I think Newsom his goose is cooked now. His political ambitions surely at an end. But let's switch gear, Garland. It's the big day coming up. This is the 12th, so Joe Biden's in for another 8 days. Let's stop talking about him and talk about how it looks to you. What kind of whirlwind is Trump going to come in with? Some of it is unexpected. He retweeted an interview by Jeffrey Sachs in which Jeffrey describes the sinister, dark and sinister personality of Benjamin Netanyahu and how he's been trying to drag America into war with Iran for decades. And Trump retweeted that. And then Netanyahu declared he was no longer coming to the inauguration. Is this a straw in the wind?
You know, I certainly hope that that is an indication that Donald Trump will have a more realistic foreign policy. He also had a video that there's another video out that of Donald Trump where he talks about the conflict in Ukraine, and he makes it clear that he sees the expansion of NATO as being at the root of the problem. So it sounds to me like there is some realism there, that maybe he has some people around here that's realistic. I know there are at least 2 people who are likely to be in his administration who have admitted that they watched the Duran. I think we probably have the alternative media effect going on here, where there are people in Trump's administration who are watching and listening to alternative media and maybe getting some more realistic perspectives. One of the things that Donald Trump's going to have to deal with is the sabotage. We see that just this week, Joe Biden admitted that the latest Russian oil sanctions will increase inflation on the American people, and one would have to imagine that that is the intent. Certainly, the Biden administration will likely do other things to try to sabotage the Trump team's ability to move forward. And I'm not saying that Donald Trump's going to be good or great or bad or anything. We have no idea how things are going to work. But certainly there are promising signs as far as foreign policy. And certainly there will be ones that make us, scream and cry at the same time, no doubt, knowing Donald Trump.
Well, the Ukraine track is, of course, one of the most obvious ones. And there seems little doubt that President Trump is going to ditch Zelensky. Zelensky will have to be replaced because that's the only basis on which the Russians will talk to the Ukrainian government. I mean, their attitude is, why should we speak to the monkey? We want to speak to the organ grinder. And the organ grinder is the President of the United States. So it seems likely to me that the Ukrainian regime is on its last legs. I mean, on the battlefield itself, Russia is carrying all before it. And if they don't get round a table soon, there'll be nothing to get round the table about. But one of the things that I was keen to talk to you about was big tech. The Trumpites, the MAGA people, the right, the Musks, they made a big thing about the Democratic Party being the party of censorship and under the guise of fact-checking and all the rest, and made out at least that they would usher in a new free speech era. And it's already had some impact. You've got Zuckerberg on his knees at Mar-a-Lago, throwing money at Trump for the inauguration ball and sacking his fact-checkers. describing them in the most extreme terms. Should we be hopeful that at least to some extent life will be freer for commentators like thee and me under this Trump administration?
I think there are some indications that we should be hopeful. I do think a lot of that depends on what happens in the Middle East and the Gaza conflict, because one of the fears or concerns that I have is that under the Democrats, the Ukraine conflict was used as the impetus for censorship. Anything that you said, you're a Putin's lover or whatever the case may be, so you had to be censored. And it is possible that if or maybe one could argue even likely, that if the Gaza conflict is not mitigated in some way, that it will be replaced. They will replace the Ukraine conflict as the reason for censorship with the certainly with the issue of Zionism. So many of us are concerned. We see signs with what's happening in Meta, and the pushback from the liberal class, I think, is a positive thing, because if the liberal class is angry, something good must be going on. But will that be replaced with you're an anti-Semite and you hate Israel, and so therefore you have to get the same treatment as before? I think that remains to be seen, and that's a concern that people should be ready to make some noise about if it becomes the case.
Now, Netanyahu's not coming to the ball. Have you got your invitation? You're just round the corner. Are you going to at least take a look at the inauguration?
Yes, I've actually been invited to speak at least one event so far, so I imagine I'll be in the vicinity. Right now, I would say my advice to Donald Trump is going to be hide somewhere in a bunker until such time. You haven't gotten in office yet, and we've seen them take a couple of swipes at Donald Trump. So right now, he's not president. He needs to be very, very careful. But I'm very close, just on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., and I will be speaking at some events, and I will be involved in some of the things going on. I imagine there'll be some protests against Donald Trump, but based on the margin of victory, I can't imagine that the protests will be very well attended.
Now, he got off the hook on the Stormy Daniels, didn't he? I mean, they have tried to kill him, but they've also tried judicially through lawfare to destroy him. And that, to a remarkable degree, has all just run into the sand.
Oh, it's far worse than that, because it's backfired. I think they turned Donald Trump into a sympathetic figure. I think there were a lot of people in this country who saw it as lawfare. People who understood the charges were baffled as to how any prosecutors could go forth with some of these absurd charges. So ultimately, I don't think that these were effective, and they backfired. Additionally, I think they'll backfire because I think they infuriated Donald Trump. I think here we are a week and a half before he becomes president, and he got one last punch to the face. So I think Donald Trump's going to come in with some residual anger, and hopefully he will have people do deep investigations, deep dives. I'd like to know about the connections between these prosecutors and the people in the White House to see if, in fact, these prosecutions were local, or if they were, in fact, instigated by people very high up in the Biden administration, which I suspect. I also think that Joe Biden is going to be issuing a lot of pardons over the next, they're talking about that over the next week or so. But I don't think that the Trump administration should refrain from investigating the people that have been pardoned. Even if you're not going to charge them, if you can't charge them, the American people deserve to know the truth.
Yeah, exactly. I've actually sent him a long list of things that he should do in that regard. Investigate things, starting with the, I believe, fraudulent election of Joe Biden 4 years ago. I don't know if he'll ever read it, and if he does, whether he'll ever act on it. But I'll add that point that you've just made to the list. Garland Nixon, radio talk show host, political analyst supreme. Always a delight to see you. And I'll look out for you on the television at the inauguration. Let me take a quick break, and then it's your calls coming up next. Stay tuned.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No, thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, here's a funny thing. We asked on our poll this evening, should Biden's $500 million to Ukraine be spent on the Los Angeles fires? I thought, is the Pope a Catholic? But no, it's 50-50. So that NAFO army hasn't gone away yet. 50-50 between people who think the $500 million should have been spent on the fires or should have been given to Zelensky. I'm dumbstruck. Anyway, you can have your say. 21,000 of you have voted already. Vote yes or no. Should Biden's $500 million for Ukraine be spent on the Los Angeles fires? You can vote on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. You should follow me on Telegram anyway. You can vote on my X, my Twitter feed. You can vote on the YouTube community poll, and you can vote on the YouTube stream. I can't believe it. It is 50-50. Let's take telephone calls. Here's the numbers. It's toll-free in the US and Canada. +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the UK and Ireland. 08081 965522, and the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Deborah is in Blackpool in England on Labour. Deborah, always a pleasure. How does Labour look to you now?
Oh, absolutely ridiculous, George. Absolutely, like you predicted, and the dilemma I had, as I previously said, I did not trust Starmer one bit, and there was no one else. We had to get the Tory out, who was crooked. I did vote Labour because I wouldn't vote for reform. We didn't have the Workers' Party here, but to my absolute horror and all this about Keir Starmer, smash the gangs, that guy couldn't smash his way a crisp bag, George.
He couldn't smash an egg. The problem they've got now, Deborah, is that he, after just 6 months in office, he is overwhelmingly the most unpopular Prime Minister in the first year of their premiership in all of Britain's history. Even Margaret Thatcher in 1980, at the depth of depression, was not as unpopular as Keir Starmer is in the first weeks of 2025. Labour will have to ditch him, won't they?
Well, let's hope so, but there's the two cheeks of the same backside, as we both know, George. They're corrupt to the core. We've got a fake democracy. They're so good at pointing the fingers at other countries. Be like us, democracy. We don't have a democracy, George.
No. It's a joke. It's really a joke.
Yeah,
I've just come from the inauguration of President Maduro in Venezuela, and I see that the British government has recognized somebody else as the president. I thought they learned their lesson from the Juan Guaido farce, who's now a college student in Florida. And they gave him, if you'll recall, $1 billion or $2 billion worth of Venezuela's gold, claiming that he was, in fact, the president, even though he didn't even run to be the president. Well, the Labour government here has followed Joe Biden's instructions to the letter, and they don't recognize that Maduro is the president of Venezuela, even though he quite clearly is. I saw him yesterday in Miraflores, the presidential palace. I saw the army right behind him. I saw millions of people on the streets cheering him. But somebody called David Lammy decides that, no, another guy altogether is the legitimate president of another country. And Joe Biden's just put a bounty, $25 million, for the arrest of President Maduro. So he lifted the bounty on the Al-Qaeda and ISIS leader who's now sitting in the presidency in Damascus. He lifted the bounty, $10 million. That's what you got for him. And he's put $25 million bounty on President Maduro. I mean, you don't know whether to laugh or cry. Deborah, thanks for that call. Now, you can send comments if you're watching on YouTube. Just scan the QR code now and leave a comment on the YouTube stream, and I'll be able to read some of them out. C Drive 300 says Biden went to LA to announce that he's a grandfather again. People who just lost their homes should just get over themselves because Joe had good news. What a POS. And Mose H says the LA fires, that's obvious. Yes, all the billions and billions Biden has given to Ukraine should have been spent on the American people, and the allegedly fraudulent kickback of monies to Congress and corporates. That should go to the US taxpayers. Likewise, Britain has spent millions in Ukraine, which could have been given to Britain's old people to keep them warm on this bitterly cold winter's night, I tell you. Jen Jams says they are freezing in tents in Gaza. Pray God helps them create blankets and grow food to eat. And James Hayden says, I have zero sympathy for those impacted by the fires in California. They should not get one dime until the hurricane victims are fully taken care of. I've got a better idea, James. Why don't we take care of the hurricane victims and the fire victims? After all, it would be a mere fraction of the money your government has given overseas. Odiferous Muskie, what a wonderful name, sends 10 Canadian dollars to the show. Thank you very much, Odiferous. MOATS is my Sunday church. Testify, George. Thank you very much for that and for the donation. Let's go to Canada, where Abdul wants to talk about Palestine. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, Abdul.
Hey, Galloway. I'm a big fan of your work. I really like the Workers' Party of Britain. So I have a question relating to Britain and Palestine. I have obviously heard of the news of the grooming gangs plaguing Britain, and I can't help but think that this bears such a similarity with the, horrible sexual violence conducted by Zionist terrorists in Palestine, that I wanted to ask you if you think that the Rockdale and British grooming gangs and the, Zionist terror in Palestine are all merely symptoms of an underlying problem which afflicts both nations of Britain and Palestine.
I think they afflict men in all countries and in Western countries. So degenerate has the popular culture become. So do anything you want, let your hair down, do anything to anybody that you want, do it in public on the back of a float if you like. These people have come out from under their rocks in other countries where morality is more strictly policed, either for religious or for civic reasons. So you'd never get it in Russia, for example, and you'd never get it in almost all Muslim countries. So for two different reasons, that kind of behavior is, first of all, very, very much less prevalent. And where it does manifest itself, it is met with the most horrific punishment and prosecution. As I said earlier, in a Muslim country, if you were lucky, you'd get shot in the head as you lay on the ground for sexually abusing a child. If you were unlucky, you'd get your head cut off in public. In Russia, not quite as draconian, but the prevailing moral culture is altogether more wholesome. But I do think that it's now clear. I mean, I don't want to go into details. My mother's watching. But I myself was raped at the age of 11 by our school janitor, who doubled up as a colonel in the Army Cadet Force, Royal Artillery Battery 2 Army Cadet Force. Imagine. He was white, by the way, and definitely not a Muslim. And that was, the best part of 60 years ago. So these kind of things have always existed, but they are far more out in the open and far more prevalent now. There are grooming gangs. There were grooming gangs. No doubt there still are. But the ones that Musk has been campaigning about are historic ones, and which undoubtedly blighted the lives of young girls, often white girls, but sometimes also Asian girls, who were sexually abused by gangs of men who probably and hypocritically went to the mosque on Friday and imagined that God would accept their prayers. So they called themselves Muslims. They had Muslim names, but of course the actions that they were involved in, as I said, are worthy of the death penalty and mutilation in Muslim countries. I mean, in Islam, it's not even allowed to touch an unrelated woman, never mind groom her, sexually prevail upon her. So they weren't really Muslims. They were acting in complete contradiction to Islam, but they are, you can't blame the host community here for calling them Muslims, because that's what they called themselves. Now, my party has a motion on the order paper of Rochdale Borough Council at its next meeting, demanding a national public inquiry into all of these matters. And they've grown since we tabled the motion. The number of matters this inquiry will have to look into has only grown. It is vital that that motion passes. And any councillor who seeks to obstruct that motion, who votes against that motion, will never be forgiven by the wider society in Britain, and definitely not the population of Rochdale. It's time for transparency. It's time to reveal who did what and who covered up for whom and why. That's what we need a national inquiry for, a public inquiry, with the power to subpoena witnesses, with the witnesses having to swear on oath that what they are telling is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And if they're lying, they go to prison for perjury. That's the kind of public inquiry that we need. Abdul, thanks for bringing that up. Now, on the podcast, astonishes me every week. We're now in the top 30 in New Zealand, Turkey, and Portugal. Go figure. You can download the MOATS podcast by scanning the QR code on your screen now. You can also listen to the weekly podcast via our website, which is moats.tv. Now, let's stay in England, where Emmanuel in Nottingham wants to talk about Labour. Go ahead, Emmanuel.
Hello. Good evening, George. Thank you for what you do. Can I just say before I say this, yesterday would have been the anniversary of my mother's passing. And she passed over a decade ago, but she really loved you. There wasn't many people that she showed a lot of love for. She was a true Jamaican woman. She lived in this country for many years, but she had a love for you.
God rest her soul. God rest her soul. Thank you.
So it's not so much about Labour; it's about the Labour minister. I think his name's ivorcaplin, the guy you're talking about.
Kaplan, yeah.
I got a new word for you, Zionons, because that's what this guy seemed to be. I bet he misses his mate Epstein. But what I was going to say is, because you mentioned, he had a thing for dwarfs. Nowadays we call them little people, and children are little people. You see the theme there?
Exactly. There's a theme,
It seems like some people, Zionists don't do anything to seem like the bigger people. But I wanted to also just mention, because when I heard about those fires in LA and the place called Palisades, the first thing that came to my mind is Palisades for Palestine. When you see the destruction,
me too, yeah.
But
me too.
And it does seem to have an air of, what's the word?
Karma.
It seems like judgment, karma. It seems to have an air of that about it. So I just wanted to mention that, and thank you for what you do. And
God bless you, and God rest the soul of your departed mother. And let's hope that we all meet again one day. Comments on YouTube. Catalina Novara says, boycott the wonderful company products. Theodard Test says, George, can we talk about more important stuff like United beating Arsenal? Well, I was overcome with emotion. I really was lost for words about the magnificence of United's performance against all the odds today and the victory. Piano Man says, wonder of the pistachio billionaire Resnicks, California's richest farming family, who guzzle more water than all the fire-ravaged Los Angeles. Are they Zionists? Are they Zionists? Where do you think they put a significant part of the money that they earn from controlling the majority of California's water resources, the product itself of a secret meeting, and all their donations to Governor Newsom, to Senator Feinstein, and so on? I'll tell you where they put it. They give it to illegal settlements in occupied Palestine. Arunta 5 says, if not only California, they ignored the people in North Carolina. No money, all sent to Ukraine, where Joe launders his money. And Donald Smith says, 500 million goes to the military weapons industry and back into the pockets of the politicians with stock in the industry. Spoiler alert, the USA gives exclusively to Israel. Now, the poll is 22,000 now, and it is, it is now tilting decisively that the 500 million should have been sent to the Los Angeles fires. Now, coming up after this very short break is Max Blumenthal, the finest journalist and broadcaster in America. And there's hot competition for that title. Stay tuned. He'll be right up.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As vicious as the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, to describe Max Blumenthal as an author and journalist and editor is like saying Ronaldo is a footballer. Yeah, he's a footballer, but he's the greatest footballer. And Max Blumenthal is the greatest breaker of stories over these last years, stories that the powerful didn't want you to know. That's why he gets the brickbats. But along with the brickbats comes the respect and admiration of millions of people around the world. People were talking to me in Caracas just yesterday about Max Blumenthal and the Grey Zone News, and so they should. And you should all follow the Grey Zone. Max, it's a big, big, big story, this California fires. I spoke with our friend Garland Nixon about it earlier. So there's not much more for us on this show to say about the fires. But I do think there's more to say about the ownership of the water resources of California by not just individuals, but individuals who funnel California's money that they get from owning the water resources to starving the Palestinian people of water in the occupied territories. This story of these fires has so many quirks to it. You'd almost think there was a divine hand at work in the situation there. What can you tell us about the resnicks?
Well, first of all, thanks for the generous introduction. I hope I can live up to all that. And, sorry if I seem a little ruddier than usual. Just came from a long walk in the snow here in D.C. where we actually have water. I lived in L.A. for several years. And when I left, on the day I left, the city was actually surrounded in wildfires. I remember getting an infection, just feeling like the smoke was hanging thick over the city, like the city was uninhabitable. And that's part of the problem here, is that the city has grown far beyond its natural potential. Many of the people who are being impacted by the fire, working class, I have close friends who lost their homes, but also extremely rich people like the genocidal fanatic James Woods, who's now complaining about price gouging because his neighbors were paying an $18,000 lease for a home. Their home was burned down, and now they're being asked for $30,000. These are the problems that some of the rich are facing in the Palisades. James Wood, someone who has celebrated the destruction of homes, liquidation of entire families in Gaza, and he's not backing down on that. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance going on. You are referencing the Resnick family, who own enormous amounts of land in the Central Valley of California. Now, if you have ever driven up the 5 highway from Los Angeles to San Francisco, that's the breadbasket of America. And pistachios are the cash crop from that area that takes up the most water. We're talking about thousands and thousands of gallons just to produce one bag of wonderful pistachios, which is the company owned by the Resnick family. Now, one of the interesting things about the Resnick family is that they supported sanctions on Iran, and I believe they donated to the main think tank in Washington, which is like an Israeli front group called the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which lobbied for sanctions on Iran. I mean, Mark Dubowitz, their CEO, has designed the sanctions on Iran. Now, why would they be interested? Maybe they're ideologically Zionist, but there's another aspect to it. Iran produces the best sanctions, and they're basically killing the competition through the sanctioning of Iran and cornering the market so that California pistachios are the only thing on the supermarket table. And they own not just the water that is irrigated from the under the ground, that deprives smaller farmers and just average people in California of water. They also own Fiji Water, the Fiji Bottled Water Company, and they've backed up a military junta which allows them to offload fresh water from Fiji onto a tanker that they then ship to wealthy people in the West. So it's a pretty disturbing story. I mean, what we're seeing through the fires, what we see through every natural disaster or industrial disaster in the U.S. now, whether it's East Palestine, Ohio, or Lahaina, Hawaii, which is we lift the mask and see the inequality in this oligarchy that we live in.
Yes, I mean, it's almost karmic, the connections that you can make. But it has surely done for, in any sane polity, the policy of sending hundreds of billions of dollars abroad, whilst your own fire hydrants don't have any water. Surely somebody somewhere is, adding 2 and 2 and coming up with 4. If we hadn't sent all that money overseas, maybe we wouldn't have so many disasters and the disastrous end result of natural problems that occur, floods and so on. We wouldn't be short of money to help the people afflicted by these disasters if we weren't spending it all in Ukraine or sending it to Israel.
I mean, LA is a special case here, and there's a huge debate in the city over whether the fire department had enough money and whether it would have made a difference. And some of my friends in LA are saying, I'm not there right now, so I can't give you the best expertise or analysis from the ground on this. But they're saying, 4 massive wildfires at once in the interior of the city with 80 to 100 mile per hour Santa Ana winds. What could anyone have done against that? I mean, the city was always prepared for one massive wildfire, and it usually hits in the more outer hills. But there has been a debate over whether the fire department had enough money because Mayor Karenbass increased the police department budget, the LAPD department budget. It was a political move. It was a backlash against Black Lives Matter and the Defund the Police campaign. And it was also partly a response to a lot of petty crime that's been happening because LA gentrified its Skid Row area downtown and started moving this massive homeless population, which was like just a city within a city, into other areas like Echo Park, where like yuppies live. And people got upset with people who are mentally ill carrying out, small scale property crimes, defecating on the corner. The police budget went up. The fire department budget went slightly down. I see the right wing trying to blame this all on DEI because they have like a lesbian fire department fire chief. I mean, that would be like me blaming, the fact that the Washington Commanders, our NFL team, has male cheerleaders now for the fact that they won't win the playoff game tonight. It just doesn't really add up for me. However, I mean, there is a reality now in LA and across the country. We're seeing more and more of these kinds of massive natural disasters. It's partly just a lack of municipal planning. And what would be wrong with reallocating, first of all, some of the money being sent to Ukraine? $175 billion has been sent to Ukraine. Some of it should be sent to allow for planning for future natural disasters in the U.S. Number 2, all people below a certain income level in Los Angeles who lost their homes. A friend of mine lost her home and her art archive, which was her entire business. She lost everything because it was just in her small home. So many people or small business people lost everything like that. Should have their home rebuilt for free instead of reallocating that money to AI murder warlords like peterthiel and Parker Lucky and Mark Andreessen and this AI cartel, which is going to get basically no bid defense contracts to do targeting, not just in Ukraine, but in Gaza. And we can consider the words of none other than Vladimir Zelensky to Lex Friedman in this clownish interview he gave, this podcast interview Zelensky gave in English, where he complained that the $175 billion never actually reached Ukraine. This is Zelensky saying it. He said half of it just went back to these warlord contractors in the U.S., these white-collar, genocidal, soft-handed, eccentric, racist maniacs. And if that money is just being given back to our upper class, this is the biggest money laundering scheme we've ever seen. The money should be immediately reallocated to Lahaina, to LA, and to rebuild this country and plan for the future, because this won't be the last kind of disaster we see like this.
Now, Max, I've just been in Venezuela, albeit fleetingly, but when I got there, I discovered that the U.S. has already recognized someone else, not Juan Guaido, a much older gentleman who looked as infirm as Joe Biden, in mentally at least. And I discovered that your government has placed a $25 million bounty on the head of the president, recognized by the armed forces in Venezuela, by the courts in Venezuela, by the majority of governments in the world, many of whom were standing with me at the inauguration. But the U.S. has appointed someone else as the president of Venezuela, and having taken the $10 million reward away from the ISIS al-Qaeda chief in Damascus, they've now reallocated that money to Maduro. I mean, where do you even start with that kind of hubris?
Well, it's not just hubris, it's deeply cynical, and it highlights how self-serving the Biden gang has been. Okay, they just lifted the $20 million bounty from former ISIS deputy founder and founder of Syria's al-Qaeda chapter, Mohammed Jolani, who's now rebranded as Ahmed al-Sharaa, now that he is part of the ISIS, or Islamic State in Suits administration in Damascus, which the U.S. has de facto recognized because they've agreed to treat the Israeli occupation down in the Syrian Golan with kid gloves or no gloves at all, and aren't challenging the U.S. occupation of northeastern Syria, including its oil fields. Now that money's freed up, so now they're putting the bounty on Nicolas Maduro's head, someone who has never been involved in terrorism, has faced false charges of drug trafficking from William Barr, who's in his previous incarnation before being Trump's attorney general, helped write the pardons for the Iran-Contra felons in the Reagan administration, someone who came up in the CIA. And what is the Biden administration doing on its way out by adding a new layer of sanctions on Maduro and basically inviting any mercenary or terrorist or cartel from Colombia to come kill him? One thing they're doing is they're trying to prevent the Trump administration from making a deal with Venezuela to lower the cost of oil in America. And at the same time that the Biden administration did this, they put sanctions on Russia's so-called ghost fleet, basically any ship that is carrying Russian oil that isn't insured in the UK. What is that going to do? That's going to raise the prices of oil for sure, because the US is sanctioning Venezuelan and Iranian oil, and we're still getting oil and gas from Russia. So it will increase oil prices under Trump, which will then have a knock-on effect of increasing inflation. And then the Democrats will come in and say, Trump wrecked the economy, vote for us in the midterms, And if Trump tries to go to Venezuela and say, hey, let's make a deal, do some power sharing agreement, something, can we work this out? Because Trump had previously hinted at wanting to do that while Elliot Abrams and John Bolton were trying to run a coup. Remember, he referred to Maduro as a tough cookie and said he's not going anywhere, and they freaked out and tried to corner Trump. So if Trump tries to do a deal allowing Venezuelan crude to be refined in Texas, which would be a great arrangement for Americans, it's going to be that much harder to do because he first has to lift the bounty from Maduro, and he'll be attacked from within his own base and by his own Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. So what I'm saying is the Biden administration has injected a poison pill into the U.S. economy for the sole purpose of undercutting Trump. It's pure political pettiness at the price of the pocketbook of Americans.
And ditto the latest tranche of money to Ukraine, surely, and the permissions to fire long-range rockets into people's homes inside Russia. All of these are poison pills, aren't they, to try and force Trump, maybe he doesn't need forced in some regards, but to try and force Trump to effectively continue the discredited foreign policy of President Biden.
Yeah, for sure. And while they're constantly daring Putin and declaring that Putin's just bluffing, which is what they said from 2014 on until reality came crashing through and Putin invaded. Now the Biden administration is trying to prevent Trump from cutting a deal to end this war, or in the words of Vice President J.D. Vance, to just simply end the killing of Ukrainians. And you'll notice if you're in the U.S., there's just this flood of media from Biden-friendly publications, first touting the supposed successes of the Ukrainians. Like the New York Times Magazine last week was all about the Ukrainian new strategy of suicide drones and how it's terrorizing the Russians. Like, yeah, they can actually win this, and they're refining modern warfare. And then there's this triumphalism. Yeah, actually, I have it right next to me. This is the cover of Foreign Affairs. This is the official journal of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is, the home to the foreign policy elite in the U.S. and Wall Street's de facto think tank. And the headline is "The Strange Triumph of a Broken America." America is polarized. It's socially doing terrible. Many Americans are angry. They don't trust their government. But the Biden foreign policy has worked. It broke Syria. China's economy is weakened. Russia is being ground down in Ukraine, and the Russian ruble is getting weaker against the dollar. It's the way that they see the world is so cynical and so Manichaean. But they actually believe, this was also transmitted to the viewers of CNN through Fareed Zakaria before interviewing NSC Director Jake Sullivan, that the Biden administration has scored this great victory against multipolarism and against these rising new powers and secured the position of the dollar, and that perhaps if Trump does the right thing and he just follows their lead, the unipolar order will actually be restored. And that is the fantasy that they're trying to sell. Not average Americans. They don't care what average Americans think. They're trying to sell this to the foreign policy elite, the lanyards who make all the decisions and decide where all of our money goes.
Now, finally, Max, you know me. I'm always looking for a silver lining in any cloud. And when I heard that Netanyahu was now not coming to Washington for the inauguration, and that reportedly one of the reasons is that Trump had indirectly insulted him by retweeting Jeffrey Sachs' rather dark and damning description of Netanyahu, I thought, is there a change here? Is there a silver lining in the cloud, which was a dark one, about Trump's dependence on the Adelsons and other big money Israel supporters in the U.S.? Can you shed any light on this?
Yeah, I don't know if this is me shedding light. It's me speculating. But I don't think Netanyahu would have reacted in such a rash way to what could have been an underhanded insult, given that he hated Barack Obama, but he would constantly come to Washington, and then he would give Obama the business in public and show who's really in charge. And Netanyahu has a massive card to play against Trump in the form of Miriam Adelson and her $100 million, which will also be deployed during the midterm elections coming up in just 2 years. So I don't think that is it. Also, in the Jeffrey Sachs interview, he attacked Obama over Syria. So Trump might have just heard that he attacked Obama and put it up. We don't know. One thing we should be thinking about, though, is Netanyahu's health. He just underwent a major operation, a prostate operation. It was said to be a urinary tract infection, but you don't get your prostate, as far as I know. Maybe I'm not like the leading expert on prostate health because I'm only 47, but you don't get your prostate removed for a urinary tract infection. And so it could be that Netanyahu is hiding something like cancer or a more serious health condition. And that's why he didn't come. He may not have recovered well from the operation. But Netanyahu, if he's not going to be there forever. So Netanyahu, the martyr, would actually be more valuable to his own cause than Netanyahu leaving office and then facing all sorts of prosecutions, October 7th, investigations. But I think Netanyahu's position is secure for the Trump administration, at least his agenda, which is driving towards regional war. And I do know that that is something that Trump doesn't want at the beginning of his term. Trump doesn't want an open-ended conflict with Iran, and I don't think the Iranians want it either. But Netanyahu does not want, it seems clear to me, he does not want the hostages to come out on anyone's terms but his own. And as long as the hostages and captives are in Gaza, then he has all the ability he needs to continue pushing for the regional war, which is propping up his reign of terror.
You definitely lived up to the billing. Max Blumenthal, thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Should Biden's $500 million to Ukraine be spent on the Los Angeles fire? Well, the poll numbers are climbing, and the number of people, except on X. It's funny, every week on these polls, it's only X where the wrong answer is competitive with the right answer. It is beginning to be a bit suspicious, let me put it that way. Now, let me take a quick break, then it's your calls, and then it's Gayatri with the social media roundup. Stay tuned.
There's a group of people in Twitter who are daily posting discussions about Gaza, Lebanon, what's happening, news updates, aid for Gaza, and trying to enlist the help of Jordan and France and any other regional entity that will help get more aid into Gaza and all of Gaza, all of Palestine, for everyone who suffers. So I want to request that everyone who is listening to this go to your local council meetings and peacefully request that their representatives at the local levels do this, because it works.
Thanks for the call, Pia, in Uruguay. I'm a free man of the city of San Francisco, awarded to me for my work on Palestine, on the steps of City Hall itself. So it was a particular delight for me that the San Francisco Council voted by 8 votes to 3 to demand a ceasefire. And that decision didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of campaigning to force the local authority representatives to vote.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
A big hello to the legend that is Norma in Bristol, who's watching the show for the first time on her big TV in her living room. Remember, if you have a connected smart TV with the YouTube app, you can watch MOATS in glorious Technicolor on the big screen. That's what I do. It's what my children are doing right now, at least if they're following orders. Just search for my channel on YouTube. Let's go to California, about which we've been speaking, where Kathy has a word or two on the LA fires. Kathy, welcome to the show. Sorry for your troubles.
Oh, hi, George. I'm in Northern California, so not affected by the fires, but yeah. It looks pretty bad.
It does.
And I just wanted
apocalyptic.
I just wanted to clarify for people, in Northern California, obviously, we had all this years ago, and everyone in Northern California, I shouldn't say everyone, but everyone that I know, they've been canceling our homeowners insurance for probably 5 to 10 years. I think mine was canceled like maybe 6-7 years ago. And once they cancel you, there's nobody else that will cover. So California made up a basically an insurance plan for people that can't get insurance. And it's called the FAIR plan, which it's anything but fair, obviously. But people were expressing a lot of concern about, because a lot of these people, they don't have the money that like Palisades has. And so they're thinking that because State Farm canceled all of them, that, you know, they're going to be out or whatever. But it sounds like if it worked the same in Southern California, which I don't know that it did, but if those people, if the only insurance that was available to them was this California plan, then it's actually the state of California that's going to be out a whole lot of money. Because if they're going to have to cover all this, then, I mean, that's just like astronomical, I would think.
Yeah, totally. I mean, what's the legality of that? How can you cancel people's insurance? Don't you have a legal contract with them? Or do they wait till it's time to renew it, or what?
That's what happened with, I have 5 neighbors. 3 of 5 of us have already went through this. And the other 2 neighbors are basically just kind of waiting. And from what listening to everybody in my little area, it's pretty much everybody that came up against this. And yeah, I know with mine, when it came time to renew the policy, they just said they weren't going to renew it. And my agent told me that, basically the only thing they could get anybody was this California FAIR plan. So,
very interesting. I didn't know about that, Kathy. I'll look deeper into it. Thanks for the call. Jubier is in Texas, but also on the fires. So let's go to Jubier in Texas. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. I'm from Texas, and I was going to say that everybody's talking about how the resnicks are responsible for the fires, or for the water not going to the fires or whatever. But that's not true, because I don't know if you know this, but in America we have something called eminent domain, and the government, they could use eminent domain to make sure that the water goes to where it's supposed to go. But also, I want to say, people need to put the blame where the blame lies. The blame lies on the government. It lies on Gavin Newsom and karenbass and all of those people that are in that Democrat administration, because they knew from the very beginning, because it's all that people have to do, because nobody's talked about this tonight on the show. All you have to do is look at the videotape from 2018 till today of President Donald Trump telling Gavin Newsom, I call him what President Trump calls him, Gavin Newsom, telling him, hey, you guys need to make sure y'all do proper forest management. You guys need to make sure y'all have water for the fire hydrants and all that, because they've been stripping the water out to sea. And that's the crazy part. And so that's why they don't have any water. And this whole thing about the rednecks, yeah, they bought rights for water, but they had the right to buy the rights for water. It might have been a corrupt deal, but that doesn't take the blame away from the government from shipping all the water out to sea, because last year and the year before that, California, they had loads of water. And so people are saying, oh, where's the rednecks? But you have to remember, where the hell did all the water, if that was the case, where the hell did all the water go? And where the water went was out to sea, because that's why they didn't have any water pressure there. And it's really, it's just infuriating for me to see people talk about, it was them, when you have to lay the blame on the government, because they're the ones who, are to blame for all of this.
Yeah, but I take that point, and you know more about it than I do. But the truth is, nobody should own the water. God gave us the water. It fell from the sky. Nobody but the people should own the water. But if you are going to have private ownership of the water, then forgive the pun, but it has to be a transparent deal. And there was nothing transparent about the resnicks getting control of California water. But what was transparent was the mega donations given to Newsom and Feinstein by the resnicks over many years. They are big funders of the Democratic Party that runs California, and which gave the resnicks the right not just to control the water, but to waste the water on their own farms. Billions of gallons of California's water goes to feed the pistachio farm owned by the people that own the water supply. Now, I know America's a capitalist country, and I know it's probably going to be for quite some time. But even by capitalist morality, there's something very dodgy going on there. Thanks, though, for your call. More comments from YouTube. Jerry Fair says the head of the LA Department of Water and Power is paid over $700,000, an obscene amount for anyone, and even worse when it is for that bloated, overpaid department. And Catalina Novara sends $4.99. Thank you very much, Catalina, and says, the wonderful company. Now I realized that as soon as Max said it, the wonderful company makes wonderful pistachios. It's the Resnicks Company. Hello mandarins, Teleflora, Fiji water, wonderful lemons, wonderful pomegranate juice, Justin wine. Thank you for that clarification. Nikki A. says the fires in California seem to be an updated version of the grapes of wrath. Who will pick up that land for the equivalent of pennies on the dollar? Those who had mortgages now have no home. Very powerful point, Nikki. Captain Jack UC says, while the fires rage and homes are destroyed, around 1.3 million full-time U.S. service members are on duty, going about as usual, playing at basketball, jogging, and going to the rifle range. Kaz One Love says, hi, Max and George. Thanks for your support. You're both doing amazing work in explaining exactly what is going on in the world. Thanks. We could not ask for better representation. Brilliant family. Thank you kindly for that. Let's stay in the U.S. and talk to Matt in Portland, but again, about the LA fires. Matt, welcome to the show.
Welcome, George. Okay, the whole problem with LA is their water. Their water comes, when they built this city in 1905, they built it in the desert with no actual water. So what they did was, through the Owens Project, they went to where Lake Owen is, and they deceitfully deceived the people there and bought up all their water, and they took the river that fed into Lake Owen, and they rerouted to L.A. This was when L.A. was a small town. That's all where all their water comes from that feeds in L.A. So over 120 years of building this into a metropolis, the water has dried up over there. Now, the people there in the Owens Valley are suing. They're filing a lawsuit against the city of L.A. and the Water Bureau to get back, through eminent domain, to get back their land and water rights. And if they succeed, L.A. has nowhere else the water comes from. Now, this whole thing with the resnicks and the valley is they went and bought up water from Northern California that Northern California sold to them. So that's why, and that's another reason why they built these reservoirs, was to hold that extra water. Yes, the resnicks do control who gets the water, and that's really messed up. But yeah, that was a deal they made that the Valley made with Northern California. LA never sat down and talked to Northern California to try to buy off some of their extra water to bring it to LA. So with the fact that all their water does is come from the Owens Valley, and now that has completely dried up. The lake is gone. It's just sand.
I saw a picture of it, yeah.
Yeah, it's salt. And so that's why they're suing to try to replenish, because when you overuse, as LA likes to overuse water, and this is the only source of water. But as far as the fires, this is Gavin Newsom's fault. He could have set up the fire hydrants through engineering to take the Pacific Ocean, filled them up, and used them to deal with the fires, but they didn't. This was in works like Lehigh. They want the land. And who are they going to sell it to? BlackRock, so they can build rental properties, because they don't want people owning homes. Now, the rich will be able to rebuild, but the poor can't. So the banks are going to buy them out, sell this to BlackRock so they can build rental properties so they can get rid of home ownership in LA. That's the real plan. This has been in the works, like what they're doing in North Carolina by kicking people out and making them homeless now. They're going to buy up the land, and they're going to build rental. BlackRock will do this. They're going to do this in Hawaii. They don't want you owning homes. They want you to rent so they can make all the money. That's what really this is all about. Because when the winds came, Bass knew, and she left. The winds didn't start the fire. I believe that, like a lot of people, that these fires were intentionally set to burn people out of their homes. And yes, James Wood lost his home, and he hasn't learned a thing from that. Jamie Lee Curtis said when the fires hit, it made her think of Gaza, which I'm not sure if that means she's learned her lesson about supporting Israel and what they've done to Gaza, and it's making her reflect seeing the damage. Because a lot of people said this when they looked at the damage afterwards, it made them think of Gaza. That's actually an important thing that people do see, the similarities to the damage LA is facing. It is important.
I'm glad to hear
Gaza.
it.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear it. And if that's widespread, well, maybe the karma will have worked. Thanks for that, Matt. Now, what is it? It's Sunday today. So on Tuesday, just a couple of days from now, I've got a very important show coming up. Have It Out with Galloway. And you can join it. Here's how. Join me every week to Have It Out with Galloway. We discuss the great issues of the day and occasionally the odd philosophical meandering through the meaning of life. You can be on the show by contacting us at our website, haveitoutwithgalloway.com. You can be the star of the show. Join me on Have It Out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Will be my guest, Ghadi Francis, the fragrant commentator from the Middle East that so many of you have enjoyed her contributions here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Poll update, well, nearly 25,000 people have now voted. Should the Biden $500 million that he sent to Ukraine have been spent on Los Angeles? Well, on Telegram, 94% say yes. But on Twitter, only 46% say yes. In other words, the majority on Twitter are happy that the $500 million went to Ukraine instead. Go figure. On the YouTube community poll, 91% say yes. On the YouTube stream, 91% say yes. So the Twitter, the X result is very much an outlier, and it's a mystery. Let me put it that way. Dennis is in Maine, but wants to talk about Los Angeles fires. Go ahead, Dennis.
Oh, thank you, George. I want to thank you also for your broadcast and what you're doing to help educate us about the world.
Thank you.
And I'm very much upset with the elite in this country and the military-industrial complex and how they're pretty much destroying the working-class people. But they're trying to divide us on political lines as usual. But yeah. I think a lot of folks, my son's a firefighter. I was talking with him and a coworker yesterday. We're beginning to see what's going on here, and I think maybe slowly we're starting to come together and unify against what's happening in this country. I'm 72 years old. I'm old enough to remember John Kennedy, and this country does not resemble anything like what it was when he was president.
No, the Republic died in Dallas. I'm with Bob Dylan on that one. I know you probably won't be a socialist, and I know that a socialist is a kind of bad word in the United States, but for me, the fire service is socialism. And capitalism is the insurance company refusing to give you insurance cover, cutting you off in your prime. Dennis in Maine, my regards to your firefighters in the family. I think the world of firefighters everywhere. I have long been associated with the firefighters' unions, not just in Britain, but in many other countries too. So my regards to your son. Now, my good wife, looking marvelous for somebody who hasn't been to bed for 2 days and who just got off an airplane with me a couple of hours ago. Gayatri, what's rattling?
Goodness gracious. What a flying visit there was for us to make across the Atlantic.
It's far too far to go for a day and a half.
Yeah, we spent
I'm not sorry that we went, but I'm feeling the impact of it, put it that way.
Yes, definitely. And it was amazing, though. As you said, we are not sorry that we went. It had been 13 years since we were there.
Yeah, we went on our honeymoon.
Yeah, that's right. And on the back
and now 3 kids later, we come back wrecked from the journey.
Yeah, and then reflecting on how Venezuela, how our journey was and what we saw in this very short visit. It's incredible how if you go to, I don't even know the name of the guy who claims to be the elected president.
No, do I know.
I mean...
I know he's demented like Joe Biden.
Do you remember that the then opposition was called Capriles?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who knows him now, right? I just happened to look him up.
Juan Guaido is a student at a college in Florida. And only, a couple of years ago, the British government was making it plain that the courts must give him Venezuela's gold from the Bank of England's vaults. Now he's a student. He's got a backpack. He's an overgrown student.
Can you please remind the audience the response during the failed coup attempt in 2002, was it, of President Chavez, when was it the foreign minister who...
Oh, Dennis McShane.
There you go, please.
Dennis McShane. Another Labour minister who went to prison for malfeasance. But when he was the Foreign Office Minister, he made history. He had to issue 2 statements in a single day. The first statement was when the coup in Venezuela removed Hugo Chavez and took him off to jail. And Dennis McShane, the Foreign Office Minister, issued a statement welcoming the overthrow of this dictator and looking forward to having close relations with the coup masters who had overthrown him. But the coup only lasted 6 hours. And so the army rallied and released President Chavez and put him back in the presidential palace. And the hapless Dennis McShane had to come out blinking into the TV lights and issue a second statement welcoming the restoration of democracy and the restoration of President Chavez to his rightful place. And then about a year later, the same Dennis McShane went to prison. Karma?
Karma, another funny juxtaposition is David Lemmy condemning Maduro's election. And then on the same Twitter feed, he then posts a picture of him sitting with the Faisal bin Farhan of Saudi Arabia, complimenting the meeting.
Well, there are no elections at all. And never will be, and never has been.
No.
So he's quite happy to sit with dictators who haven't been elected by anyone, who are in power only because of their family name, but he's got the gall to denounce President Maduro. I mean, the good news is nobody gives a toss what the British government thinks about anything. Even just across the English Channel, they don't give a toss.
Unbelievable. Yeah, so we're here to tell you that the support for President Maduro, officially elected president, is very solid. We see on the streets.
Very solid. They were counting on the army overthrowing Maduro, and the army is right behind them. Yep. So their goose is cooked. The best thing would be for President Trump to actually make a deal with Maduro. Maduro won't like me saying this, but they're quite similar personalities.
As in they're the strongmen type?
They're strongmen, yeah. They could make a deal together. Everything's the art of the deal for President Trump, so make a deal with Maduro. And that will reduce the oil price in the US. It will keep these big refineries that were built precisely for the heavy crude oil that Venezuela produces and are no use for anything else. And they're in Texas, they're in Louisiana, they're all over the US.
Yeah.
They built special refineries that are only of use for Venezuelan oil. So, President Trump, if you're watching, there's a deal there to be done. And of course, there can be little changes in Venezuela. I don't know, Max mentioned power sharing earlier. I mean, what I'm saying is, Maduro is not some tyrant, unbending, unyielding. If you go halfway to meet Maduro, he'll go halfway to meet you. I'm pretty sure about that.
Yeah, you got that? Made all the notes?
You got that, Donald?
All right, so we got an email in from Dr. Ray Higginson, our friend from Wales. He says, your monologue was so very moving and, as always, very spot on. As Dostoevsky said, if God doesn't exist, then everything is permissible. So true.
Well, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
A very good point.
Yeah.
Speaking of God,
Yes.
I asked you at our breakfast in midair, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
And my answer
and
was...
your answer was God.
God.
And when you think about it, that kind of must be the case. I mean, think about that question.
I cracked it for you guys.
What came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, if it's the egg, who made the egg? If it's the chicken, how did the chicken get there? I know that's a subject for another night, but as you mentioned Dostoevsky and God, exactly. I thought I'd throw that in. Anything else going?
Well, so let me just reflect upon the poll that discusses the fire in Los Angeles. It made me think of the fire stations that were closed en masse in London under Boris Johnson.
Fire service always gets the wrong end.
And this is what I do not understand. Okay, I understand the rich capitalist people want to privatize everything, like health. Health is a perfect example that can be privatized because you can just get your own doctors, get your own clinics just for yourselves. But fire stations, how do you can't even privatize that. How are you going to have a little unit guarding every house? And that's not even the case because all Hollywood houses have been destroyed. So even all these rich people were not able to protect themselves.
You've heard me, but I always make the point that when the firefighter comes to your burning house, if he was following capitalist morality, he'd negotiate a price with you.
Yeah, how much?
He'd say, well, how much is your kid screaming up at the upstairs window? How much is your kid worth? How much is your cat worth? How much is your carpet, your furnishings worth? What are you going to pay me to plunge into that burning building and put the fire out? If he was thinking as a capitalist, that's what he'd do, but he or she doesn't do that. They plunge into the burning building for pay, which many of these people in the Palisades couldn't live a week on their annual salary.
No. And, well, you say with pay, but I believe there have been prisoners used to release some of the...
Some prisoners have been press ganged into the fire.
So those were the ones not paid and out of duty in this case. But countries like South Africa, the Iranian Red Crescent, and Mexico, they've been sending firefighters.
They've been sending
my goodness, go figure.
Yeah,
and then we haven't even discussed the horrific irony and the comparison between the imageries that we've seen from Gaza, the burning tents in Gaza, of course.
It's good that call said that people were making that point. It looks like Gaza.
This is not Gaza.
Why did you do that to Gaza then?
Yeah, exactly. So, very quickly, a few comments. Should Biden's $500 million to Ukraine be spent on Los Angeles fires? Gordon Lemon says, talk about a no-brainer. Unfortunately, that's exactly what we have leading our government. No-brainers.
No-brainers.
Matthew White says, going back to God, the $500 million should be spent on the problems that the U.S. already has within its own borders, of which there are countless.
Yeah.
When will the USA understand that God works in the interest of all, not just them? For a country full of preaching Christians, they don't seem to know the Bible very well.
Oh, no. They wear the Bible on their sleeve, but they never open it.
No, they don't. So we see that on X, the poll has been a bit hijacked a little bit. JJ says, I'm guessing this poll must be under naval attack. There's no way so many Americans prefer to give their hard-earned to Ukraine over Los Angeles
we're
fires.
running out of time. I've got something important to ask you.
What do you have?
Gavin in Belfast says, George, Reg Holsworth's specs are not looking too good on you. Who is Reg Holsworth? Do you know?
I had to look it up.
Oh!
So this is
that's what I'm looking like
Coronation
with
Street, am I correct?
Oh, I see. I quite like my specs, and my wife likes them, which is more important. Well, look, thanks. We'll go for chips shortly, but I need to take a final call from Dennis in New York on Ukraine. Dennis, fire away.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me again. And just having this curious thought, recognizing you as one of the most hopeful, encouraging, and supportive people that I've ever encountered in my life, I just have a question for you about a formulation that I've been thinking about. I think it's pretty clear that the only hope that there is for the Ukraine and Zelensky's enterprise is for he, they, and everyone else who has any hope that there's any salvation there. The only hope is that they can accept the fact that the Ukraine has been summarily defeated and start from that, use that as a starting point.
Yeah.
So what they have to do is basically give up any hope that they have that the Ukraine can be salvaged in its present form and that this enterprise can survive. We need to start over anew. And it's not hard to wrap your brain around that. That's a very hopeful thought in my mind.
I'm 100% with you. Yeah, go on, Dennis. Finish that point.
But then one more thing. Then I had the thought that because as hopeful as we all are, I'm hearing all of these very astute, very positive thinking, well-informed analysts today lauding Donald Trump and in a way that suggests that he is or might ever be anything other than another American exceptionalist, hopeless and helpless American exceptionalist, and thinking that we need to apply the same logic to Donald Trump, to the United States, and to the West in general, as we know we have to apply to Ukraine. And that is, we have to recognize that it's over for the United States. There's nothing that Donald Trump can do, as much as I would like to think that he could be the savior somehow, or that someone might come along. But I'm to that point where it's so easy to understand that logic, applying it to Ukraine. I just wonder what your thoughts are about applying that logic to ours.
I don't have time to do justice to that excellent contribution. What I would say is this: he might be all those things you said he was, but he's not as bad as the guy who's on his way out. He'll be an improvement in some places, in some things, to this disastrous 4 years of Biden-Harris. I do believe he will bring the Ukraine war, at least, to an end. And as the Ukraine war was pregnant with the possibility of World War III, we've got to say hallelujah to that. The second part of what I'm going to say, though, you'll not like. It isn't over. The US empire isn't over. The old world may be decrepit and dying, but it ain't dead yet. And the new world may be in the last trimester, metaphorically speaking, but it's not ready to be born. So we have to stop imagining that Palestine's going to be free this year, that equity between the nations and the peoples of the world is going to be achieved next month or this year. It isn't the case. The United States empire is not a paper tiger. It is still a vicious and powerful tiger, albeit there are newer, leaner, hungrier tigers out there in the jungle. I've got to go because I have some distance still to travel. Thanks very much for tuning in. Thanks to my stand-in on Wednesday, who conducted a brilliant show in his fourth language, and I commend the interview in particular with Pepe Escobar that he did, which was truly outstanding and deserves a bigger audience than it has got. With a little bit of luck and God willing, I'll be back on Wednesday with the midweek mother of all talk shows. So from Gayatri and me, it is a very good night. Bring another viewer next time, won't you?